Three entitled frat boys thought desecrating a sacred memorial was a joke. They mocked the silent female guardian, assuming no one would dare stop them. Then, an 11-year-old boy stepped out from the crowd. The late autumn air over Arden National Memorial Cemetery carried a weight of reverence. Sunlight, thin and golden, filtered through the skeletal branches of ancient oak trees, casting long, somber shadows across endless rows of pristine white marble. It was a place of profound silence, a silence that wasn't empty but full of names, of stories, of sacrifices that had purchased the nation's peace. Visitors spoke in hushed tones, their footsteps soft on the manicured pathways, their faces etched with a quiet respect. But not all of them. Near the heart of this hallowed ground, before the magnificent tomb of the unknown soldier, a boy stood watching. He was not a tourist. Prince George, at 11 years old, possessed an unnerving stillness for his age. Dressed in a simple but impeccably tailored navy coat, he observed the grounds not with the fleeting curiosity of a visitor, but with the focused intensity of a student. This was a private tour, a lesson in duty far from the palace walls. His father had called it a chance to understand the meaning behind the ceremonies. Beside him, a protection officer, a man built to blend into the background, remained silent, his eyes scanning the perimeter with practiced vigilance. Protocol was clear. Let the prince observe, let him learn. George's attention, however, wasn't on the grand architecture or the sweeping vistas. It was fixed on a lone figure standing guard before the tomb. Guardian Anya Sharma. She stood as if carved from the same marble as the monuments surrounding her. Her uniform a stark, dark contrast to the white stone. Her rifle was held with a practiced ease that bespoke thousands of hours of drill, her face unreadable beneath the brim of her service cap. But George, a keen observer of details, saw something more. It was in the subtle tension of her posture, the unwavering focus in her eyes, a level of alertness that felt less ceremonial and more like the coiled readiness of a true sentinel. He knew she wasn't just a statue, she was a shield. Then, the sacred silence was shattered. Three young men, their boisterous laughter echoing unnaturally in the quiet air, swaggered toward the tomb. They wore matching hoodies with Greek letters stitched on the front, and a faint reek of cheap beer preceded them. They were a discordant note in a symphony of respect, their entitlement of visible aura. They made a beeline for Guardian Sharma's post, their intentions clearly not reverential. "Yo, check this out," the tallest one slurred, gesturing with a sloppy grin. "They got real-life dolls here." His friends snickered, their eyes filled with the casual cruelty of those who have never been taught the meaning of sanctity. "I bet she doesn't even blink," another one chimed in, pulling out his phone to record. "Let's see if she's even real." They positioned themselves directly in her line of sight, their mockery a deliberate performance. "Hey, pretty soldier," the leader called out, his voice laced with a sneer. "Do they pay you extra to look miserable? Or is that just your face?" Anya Sharma remained motionless. Her training was absolute. You do not engage. You do not acknowledge. You are a symbol, a rock against which the waves of disrespect crash and recede. But the air around her grew thick with tension. Nearby, a mother quietly pulled her young daughter closer, shielding her from the unfolding ugliness. George watched, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. He saw the shift in the crowd, the uneasy glances, the quiet retreat of families. This wasn't just youthful ignorance. It was a conscious act of desecration. The verbal assault escalated, growing more personal, more venomous. The men seemed to feed off her stoic silence, mistaking her discipline for weakness. The second man, shorter but with a more aggressive stance, began to mimic her ceremonial march, adding exaggerated, offensive hip sways. "Look at me, I'm a big, tough soldier girl," he jeered, his friends roaring with laughter. The mockery was now steeped in a crude, demeaning sexism that made George's stomach clench. Anya's expression remained a mask of professional neutrality, but George could see the faintest tightening of the muscles along her jawline. She was a fortress under siege, holding firm, but the assault was relentless. Then, the leader took it a step further. He finished his beer in a single, noisy gulp and, with a flick of his wrist, tossed the empty aluminum can onto the pristine marble plaza. It landed just a few feet from Anya's polished boots, the metallic clang echoing like a gunshot in the hallowed silence. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Phones, which had been respectfully pocketed, were now raised, not to capture the solemnity of the tomb, but to document the violation of it. The act was so brazen, so contemptuous, that it felt like a physical blow to everyone who held the place sacred. Anya didn't flinch. Not a flicker of an eye, not a twitch of muscle. Her gaze remained fixed on the horizon, her breathing steady. But inside, every fiber of her being screamed. This ground was more than stone. It was a promise, a tribute to the fallen. And these men were spitting on it. "What's wrong, dollface?" The leader taunted, emboldened by her lack of reaction. "Can't even be bothered to pick up the trash? What kind of honor guard are you?" George felt a cold anger rise within him, a feeling so intense it was almost startling. He took a half step forward before his protection officer placed a subtle, restraining hand on his shoulder. "Sir," the officer murmured, his voice a low warning. "Let security handle it." But George's eyes were locked on the scene. He was processing what happened when ceremony was met with cruelty, when honor was confronted by ignorance. He was learning a lesson that no tutor could ever teach. The man who had thrown the can wasn't finished. He reached into the pocket of his hoodie and pulled out a small, silver flask. He unscrewed the cap with a theatrical flourish, the glint of metal catching the afternoon sun. The acrid smell of whiskey briefly cut through the crisp autumn air. He grinned, a nightmarish expression of pure malice. "Bet this will get her to move," he said to his friends, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Let's give the lady a real drink. A toast to the fallen, right?" He drew his arm back, preparing to pour the liquor onto the sacred ground in front of Anya's post. It was the ultimate act of desecration, a final, unforgivable line being crossed. The crowd held its collective breath. This was no longer a prank. It was an abomination. In the split second before the whiskey could defile the marble, a voice cut through the tense air. It was not loud, but it carried a weight and clarity that made it impossible to ignore. "That's enough." Prince George had moved. He didn't run or shout. He simply stepped forward from behind the low, velvet rope that separated the public from the ceremonial plaza. He walked with a calm, measured stride, his small frame radiating an authority that seemed utterly incongruous with his age. His protection officer moved with him, a hand hovering near his radio, his expression a mixture of alarm and grudging respect. The three men turned, their sneering faces shifting to expressions of confused annoyance. "What's this?" the leader grunted. "Some little kid wants to play hero." George stopped just at the edge of the plaza, his eyes, clear and steady, locked onto the man with the flask. When he spoke again, his voice was devoid of fear. "You're not strong," he said simply. "You're cowards." The word hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. The man's grin faltered. "What did you just say to me, you little brat?" "I said you're cowards," George repeated, his tone even. Three grown men, attacking one person who is bound by her duty not to respond. That isn't strength. That's bullying. And doing it here, that's shameful. He gestured with a slight nod toward the tomb, especially against her. The directness of the accusation, coming from a child, seemed to stun them. The second man tried to laugh it off. "Hey, we're just having some fun, kid. Lighten up." George's gaze shifted to him, sharp as a shard of ice. Throwing trash and threatening to pour liquor on a memorial isn't fun. It's disrespectful. "That guardian," he said, his voice rising with a quiet passion, "is a soldier. She stands here to honor people who gave everything for the freedoms you're abusing. She represents a duty that is heavier than your egos combined." The crowd was utterly silent now. The tourists, the families, even the distant hum of city traffic seemed to have faded away. They were witnessing something extraordinary, a moment of profound moral clarity delivered by an 11-year-old boy. The leader's face flushed a deep, mottled red, a mixture of fury and public humiliation. He had been challenged and exposed by a child, and his drunken pride couldn't bear it. "You think you're better than us, you little rich boy?" he snarled, taking a menacing step closer. George didn't back down. "I think anyone who shows respect is better than what you're being right now." That was it. The final shred of the man's self-control snapped. With a furious roar, he tossed the flask aside, grabbed the velvet rope with one hand, and vaulted over the barrier into the restricted ceremonial area. "I'm gonna shut you up for good," he bellowed, his hand reaching out to grab the front of the prince's coat. The instant the man's foot touched the sacred ground, the instant his hand shot out toward the prince, the statue broke. Anya Sharma moved. It wasn't a panicked reaction. It was an explosion of disciplined, kinetic energy. One moment, she was a symbol of stoic endurance. The next, she was the embodiment of lethal efficiency. To the stunned onlookers, it was as if a marble statue had sprung to life, imbued with the spirit of a warrior. She didn't waste a single motion. She pivoted on the ball of her foot, her rifle held expertly in a non-threatening but ready position. As the first man lunged for George, she intercepted him. It wasn't a punch or a kick. It was a precise tactical maneuver. Her hand shot out, not to strike but to redirect. She caught his outstretched wrist, used his own momentum to spin him off balance, and with a swift, controlled leg sweep, sent him crashing to the hard marble. He landed with a heavy thud and a grunt of pained surprise. The other two were frozen for a heartbeat, their drunken minds struggling to process the sudden reversal. The second man, recovering first, swung his fist in a clumsy, wide arc. Anya sidestepped the blow with fluid grace, her hand clamping down on his arm. A sharp, downward twist, a perfectly applied joint lock, and he was forced to his knees, a cry of pain escaping his lips. The third man, seeing his friends neutralized, made a desperate, foolish attempt to tackle her from behind. It was a move born of panic, not strategy. Anya, whose senses were honed by years of training to anticipate threats from all angles, didn't even seem to turn. She simply shifted her weight, grabbed the fabric of his hoodie as he rushed past, and used his own forward momentum to slam him face first onto the plaza. He sprawled out, the air knocked from his lungs. From the moment the first man crossed the line to the moment the third man hit the ground, less than 10 seconds had elapsed. It was a masterful, almost silent display of control and power. Three grown men, who moments before had been the aggressors, now lay groaning on the ground, completely and utterly subdued. Sirens began to wail in the distance as cemetery security, alerted by the protection officer, flooded the area. But they were too late to be needed. The head of security, a stern-faced man with a colonel's bearing, rushed to the scene. He took in the sight. The three subdued men, the stunned crowd, the unruffled prince, and the guardian standing calmly over her handiwork. "Guardian Sharma," he commanded, his voice booming across the plaza. "Report." Anya Sharma snapped to a perfect position of attention, her rifle once again at her side, as if it had never moved. Her voice, when she spoke, was clear, formal, and carried to every corner of the now silent square. It was a sentence that would change everything for the three men on the ground. "Sir," she declared, her eyes locked on her commander. "They assaulted His Royal Highness." A collective gasp went through the crowd. The groaning on the ground stopped. The leader, his face now pale with a terror far colder than the marble beneath him, turned his head slowly. His eyes widened as he truly looked at the small boy for the first time, not as a target, but as who he was. The realization dawned, horrific and absolute. This wasn't just some rich kid. This was the prince. The aftermath unfolded with the somber efficiency of a state operation. Uniformed police arrived, but their role was merely to formalize the arrests. Paramedics checked the three men, finding nothing more than bruised limbs and shattered egos. As they were led away in handcuffs, their drunken bravado had evaporated, replaced by the dawning, sickening realization of their catastrophic misjudgment. The words "assaulted His Royal Highness" hung in the air, a verdict that would undoubtedly echo through courtrooms and news headlines. Later, in a quiet, sunlit room overlooking the cemetery grounds, George faced his parents. Prince William and Princess Catherine had been flown in immediately. William knelt to be at eye level with his son, his expression a complex mixture of concern and pride. "You put yourself in considerable danger, George," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "He was going to hurt her," George replied, his gaze unwavering. "He was going to disrespect this whole place. No one else was doing anything." Catherine wrapped her arm around her son's shoulders, pulling him into a fierce, protective hug. "You were incredibly brave," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You stood up for what was right." William looked at his son, seeing not just a boy, but the nascent shape of a future king. Someone who understood that true leadership wasn't about wearing a crown, but about bearing a responsibility. "You did the right thing," he said finally, "but you must also understand the consequences. We will discuss this more." Meanwhile, in a sterile office in the cemetery's administrative building, Guardian Anya Sharma stood at attention before her commanding officer, Colonel Davies. "You broke protocol," Guardian Davies stated, his voice flat. "You left your post. You engaged civilians." "Yes, sir," Anya replied without hesitation. "You understand this could be grounds for a disciplinary review? Possibly the end of your career with the Guard." "I do, sir," she said, her back ramrod straight. "But my primary duty is to protect the sanctity of the tomb and the dignity of the office. A member of the royal family was under direct threat on sacred ground. My training dictated my response. I have no regrets." Colonel Davies stared at her for a long moment, his stern facade unmoving. He had read her file, top of her class, commendations for service overseas before joining the ceremonial guard. A soldier's soldier. He leaned back in his chair, a slow, rare smile touching his lips. "Regrets? Guardian, you should have none. What you displayed out, there was not a breach of protocol. It was a textbook example of superior judgment under extreme pressure." He stood and walked around his desk. "The palace has been in contact. They were, to put it mildly, impressed. They specifically inquired about the soldier who protected the young prince with such professional ferocity." He paused for effect. "Anya, you're not getting a disciplinary review. You're getting a commendation for valor. And effective immediately, you are being promoted to Master Guardian. You'll be heading up the new training detail, focusing specifically on threat assessment and response during public ceremonies. It seems a young prince believes you have something to teach us all about what duty really means." For the first time that day, the stoic mask of Guardian Anya Sharma cracked, and a look of profound, stunned gratitude washed over her face. The next day, a different kind of quiet settled over Arden National Memorial Cemetery. The crowd were just as large, but their demeanor had changed. There was a deeper respect in their silence, a more profound understanding in their gazes. The story had spread, not through official news channels, but through the organic, powerful network of social media and word of mouth. Videos, shaky but clear, showed a young boy's courage and a female soldier's strength. The narrative wasn't just about a prince and a guard. It was about honor. Near the front of the barrier, a young girl with bright, curious eyes watched the changing of the guard. She pointed toward the new sentinel, a man this time, standing with the same stoic grace. "Mommy," she whispered to her mother, "is she here today? The brave lady soldier?" "I don't know, sweetie," her mother replied, smiling. "But because of her, everyone remembers to be respectful, don't they?" Later that afternoon, as Master Guardian Anya Sharma, now in her new supervisory role, walked the perimeter, she saw him. Prince George was standing with his father near the edge of the plaza, receiving a quiet lesson in history. Their eyes met across the expanse of marble. There was no grand salute, no formal acknowledgement. Instead, the young prince gave her a slow, deliberate nod, a gesture of profound respect from one person of duty to another. Anya, without breaking her stride, returned the gesture with the slightest, almost imperceptible dip of her chin. It was a silent, powerful exchange, an understanding that transcended rank, age, and circumstance. They were two links in a long, unbroken chain of service. As the sun began its descent, casting the white headstones in a warm, orange glow, the lesson of the previous day resonated in the quiet air. True strength wasn't found in loud boasts or aggressive posturing. It had nothing to do with gender or size. It was found in the quiet courage to speak up when others are silent, to stand for something when others fall back, and to protect the vulnerable regardless of the cost. A young prince had shown that strength. A female guardian had embodied it. And in doing so, they had reminded a watching world that the values of duty, honor, and respect are not just ancient traditions. They are a living, breathing force, worthy of defense, and capable of being championed by the most unexpected of heroes. What would you have done if you'd seen a guardian, a soldier bound by duty, being harassed while unable to respond? Would you have found the courage to speak up, as Prince George did? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one, and we ask that you please comment respect. These conversations matter. If this story reminded you of what true courage looks like, hit that like button. And if you believe in the power of honor and duty, subscribe and tap the notification bell so you never miss our daily stories. Share this with someone who needs to see that the strongest voices are often the quietest, and the greatest heroes are the ones who act when no one else will.